Hello there and welcome to our weekly look at events inside Syria. I'm Laura Kyle. In the past few days, we've seen a significant rise in violence on the streets of Syria. Activists say around 120 people died on Thursday and Friday alone. Now, before suspending their observers' mission in Syria on Saturday, the Arab League did warn of this significant escalation in violence. We've had calls from within the opposition for an all-out armed resistance, and they're growing ever louder. The slogan for Friday's protests was the right to self-defence. Meanwhile, the United Nations Security Council keeps on talking. It's currently considering a draft resolution which calls for President Bashar al-Assad to step down. But that's already being stymied by Russia, which stands against any kind of regime change in the country. The Syrian government will not allow Al Jazeera inside Syria, so our correspondent Zaina Hodda is following events from neighbouring Lebanon.
Dead bodies on the streets of the war-torn city of Homs. The Arab League Observer Mission says violence has been on the rise over the past 3 days. Activists say these people were killed by Syrian security forces. They also say it is time to declare jihad or holy struggle. There's a growing realization among the opposition that the international community will not intervene in the crisis. So protesters used Friday's demonstrations to send a message to the world. We have the right to defend ourselves, and even if we have to do it on our own, we will fight this battle. Activists who I have been speaking to have told me that armed struggle against the state is no longer an option but a duty. They have now begun setting up military councils and governorates across Syria to create a unified military command. And it seems they have the backing of the main political opposition, the Syrian National Council. Many in the opposition had long demanded the SNC support the armed opposition. The group now says it's ready to give money and equipment to the fighters as they work to create an organized command structure. As a divided world debates on what to do next in Syria, many in the opposition seem to have already made their decision. A decision not supported by all groups, who fear that taking up arms would only give the state an excuse to hit harder. Zaina Hodda, Al Jazeera, Beirut.
Well, with all the signs that Syria is indeed sliding towards a civil war, what is the international community doing? Well, here to talk about it today, our guests, we have Sameh Al-Taqi in Dubai, a prominent Syrian academic, formerly advisor to the Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, but has now parted ways with the regime. In Washington, D.C., we have Ambassador David Mack, former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Near East Affairs. And in Moscow, Dmitry Babich, a political analyst for the Russia Profile magazine. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. I do hope my voice holds out to last this discussion. Sameh Al-Taqi, I'd like to start with you. We saw in Zaina's report there a rapidly developing situation inside Syria. Why do you think we're seeing this upswing in violence now?
I think that is because the fact that the regime is not refraining from using any kind of atrocities it can. What is going on now is that we have about 40 to 45% of the Syrian territory, which is practically in a state of a civil disobedience, meaning that when there is no tank, when there are no death squads sent by the regime itself, when they withdraw from those areas, they are no more under the control of the state. Nobody is paying taxes, nobody is paying even his mobile phone, and even the curriculum of the Ba'ath Party is no more taught in those schools, which means that those areas are completely out of the control of the regime. But of course the regime can still send some his tanks, can kill, can torture, can destroy, but they cannot stay because of these civil insurgencies, those armed civilians that are practically hugged by the society, hugged by the local society, at the level of the town, at the level of the neighborhood, in the villages, and they are practically protecting those societies against the death squads, and practically those areas are becoming more and more wide, and some of them became completely out of the control. Even the regime is no more able to send his tanks, like in Zabadani, like in the mountain of Al Zawiya, some areas in Homs, some areas near Damascus, very close to Damascus, like like Qudsiya, like Douma. They are completely, even the regime is no more able to send his tanks unless he makes a major massacre. He won't be able to, they won't be able to control the areas.
When you say civil disobedience, what exactly are you referring to? Are you referring to a peaceful uprising against the regime, or are you seeing more of a move towards violence, towards armed resistance? We saw in Friday protests this banner of the right to self-defense. What does that mean?
I think that doesn't mean that those peaceful demonstrators are shifting to arms. It is something quite different, where people who are now consider themselves already dead if they are captured by the regime. They can no more return to their homes, and that's why they have recourse to arms. They are hacked by the local communities, and they are forming a kind of the local deterrence against the army of Al-Assad, which means practically that those areas are under civil disobedience, but they have their own deterrence in terms of armed forces. They are not attacking, they are not performing aggressive attack against the Syrian army, but they are defending those areas against the Scuds.
Okay, Dimitri Babic, this point is bringing you in. Do you agree with that assessment that this is largely a peaceful uprising, or remains a largely peaceful uprising against the government?
Well, I'm not a local, but what I can say is that, you know, a position which is shared by a lot of people in Russia, in China, and in other countries. Basically, I don't believe in simultaneous uprisings in several countries that somehow are all peaceful, and I don't believe in evil regimes suppressing them everywhere and the situation being so black and white. We heard from President Assad and from many other sources that not only civilians but also the government forces, the security forces, they also die in these battles, and it's indeed a rising civil war in Syria. We in Russia were very unhappy about that, because Syria has traditionally been Russia's ally, and we don't want this country to fall into a new civil war. Obviously, no one here is idealizing the regime of Mr. Assad. We have been under a leftist regime for 70 years, so we know what it is. But we know also from our own experience that total disappearance of state, what my colleague has just described, when no one pays taxes, no one even pays for mobile phones, whole areas are under control of some non-state, non-official groups, this situation is even worse. So basically, Russia is calling for both sides to come to a negotiated settlement.
Okay.
By all ways. We don't believe that you can win a civil war.
Okay, we're going to return to the events on the ground in the course of the discussion. I want to, first of all, look a little bit more about on the broader, wider international sphere of things. We've had the French ambassador to the UN calling for immediate international action to end the violence in Syria. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
More than 5,500 of people have been killed. The country is sinking into civil war. We are desperately looking for a political solution. And unfortunately or fortunately, there is no alternative.
Ambassador David Mack, if I could turn to you now. The uprising does appear to be entering a new phase. Is there still room for a political solution?
I think there is. However, the performance of President Bashar al-Assad so far has not been very encouraging. You know, just a few months ago, the United States was very cautious about how we proceeded in Syria. We were making it very clear that we were deferring to our key Arab allies and to Turkey. We were not pressing for any change in regime. In fact, we still hoped that Bashar al-Assad could be induced to engage in serious political reforms and dialogue. And we backed the efforts of both the government of Turkey and the Arab League to do this. In the end, he has disappointed everybody. And Turkey today is taking a very firm position in favor of sanctions, including arms embargo, embargo of shipment of arms to Syria. The Arab League has done its very best to engage in mediation, has sent observers, and has been, for the most part, rebuffed by the Syrian authorities. And it's the Arab League that has taken the initiative along with a couple of our European allies.
The Arab League has indeed taken the initiative.
Here.
I'm just going to jump in there because, of course, we're just getting news today that the Arab League has actually left Syria. It's admitted that it's failed in its initiative to try to end the violence. So, Samir Al-Taki, what is the next step?
I think the next step is that the Russians previously were just postponing any kind of international solution under the pretext of the Arab League role. Now the Arab League had really put the whole issue in the lap of the Security Council. So it is now the responsibility of the Security Council, it's the responsibility of Russia. I would like to remind our Russian colleagues that the current regime in Russia was a repercussion of a domino effect that happened in Europe since 20 years. And I would like to remind our Russian colleagues that they are allies now with the Russian regime against Israel. Would I understand this, that the Russians are allied against Israel? This is nonsense, you know, to speak about a kind of alliance with such a regime. Now we are now heading toward a situation where the Russians know that even the Iranians are no more requesting that Bashar al-Assad will stay on the table. This was the last third round of negotiations they did have with the National Coordination Committee, which was in Tehran. So they shouldn't put themselves just in front of the whole international community to defend this man. What we are needing is really a soft control. What we are needing a soft landing for our change. What we are needing is to protect the Christians, to protect the Alawites, to protect all minorities in our society, and to prevent the chaos. Till now, the Syrian society is able in those areas to organize itself, to build up a kind of local society. Of course, that in such a case, if this, and responsible would be Russia, if this period would be prolonged, the longer this period of non-state will continue, the longer of the non-state violence, maybe Salafist, maybe maybe Al-Qaeda will emerge in Syria, because they are looking for a new safe haven after Iraq. So Russia will be directly shooting itself in the feet if they just play on time to give Bashar al-Assad time. They know that even the Iranians are no more negotiating any real future for Bashar al-Assad.
Okay, Dmitry Babich, there is a draft resolution at the UN Security Council being discussed as we speak. Why is Russia refusing to support it?
Well, because we are afraid that the Libyan scenario will repeat itself in Syria. And I know that not only Russia, but also China is very much opposed to a violent government change in Syria. Again, I say that no one is idealizing Bashar al-Assad and his regime here. But who is against him? So far, we haven't seen any group that would come up with a program for Syria.
Okay, but there is no talk of military action in this draft. There is no talk of sanctions in this draft. So what is it that Russia is specifically against?
There is a lot of talk. There is a talk of a no-fly zone. At least there was initially. There is a lot of talk about basically pressure being put on Bashar al-Assad, and it means that the international community will take sides in this conflict that is now going on in Syria. And the Arab League is not neutral. We have seen that it basically took the side of the opposition. It's quite clear. So basically what we see is an attempt to repeat in Syria what happened in Libya. I don't think the world gained a lot from what happened in Libya. Again, without idealizing Gaddafi's regime, we should not idealize the new regime that exists in Libya. And we have to remind the whole world how this UN resolution was breached by NATO countries during the operation in Libya.
Okay.
The UN
Let me just pick up on one point that you made.
Apologies for different things than what happened.
Okay. David Mack, Dmitry Babich saying there that the Arab League is not neutral. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I don't take his view on this. I think that the Arab League has really gone the extra mile with the Bashar al-Assad government. It has made efforts that I do not think the rest of the world can ignore. Serious efforts to have political dialogue. Both individual Arab countries, the League itself by sending observers, And so far, Bashar al-Assad has broken every promise that he gave to the Arab League. It's also true that Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey worked very hard to induce Bashar al-Assad toward dialogue, and ultimately found that he was rebuffed. So I don't think it's unrealistic to be seeking a Security Council resolution at this point, and the kind of resolution that is under negotiation bears very little resemblance to the resolution for Libya. Though there will be no reference, for example, to use of all necessary measures, which allowed NATO to engage in its operations for a no-fly zone. There's nothing like that in this resolution.
Dmitry Babich, Russia has proposed another draft, a separate draft to the one that's been proposed by the Arab League and the European Union. How does Russia see a way out of the situation in Syria at the moment?
Well, as I said, we don't see any other way out but negotiations and a settlement between the two conflicting parties, or more conflicting parties if there are more. The problem is that no-fly zone for Syria doesn't make sense because the civilians who are being killed by the government forces, the government forces do not use aviation against them. So a no-fly zone would just, it just makes no sense from a humanitarian point of view here. Russia suggests basically a process of negotiation that would allow to share, that would pave the way to some kind of a power sharing agreement. Imagine what will happen to the Alawite minority, to the Christian minority in Syria if the Sunni fundamentalists come to power tomorrow. You know, our patriarch, Kirill, traveled to Syria several weeks ago, and he was greeted by local Christians who basically cried for help. For the first time in many years, their lives are indeed in danger.
Samir Al-Taqi mentioned there of sectarian violence. Not the first time that we've heard fears that this conflict will become divided along those sorts of lines. What are your fears?
I think what our Russian colleague is raising is quite logic, but this means that we should end this situation the sooner the possible. Meaning that the longer the situation, the longer the regime is using violence, the longer the other side will be having recourse to arms, and desperately people are killed by thousands, and the society is now really having recourse to arms. So this is a real danger. We are making our best to establish a trans-sectarian, trans-communal dialogue to prevent any kind of sectarian acts that could happen. But the longer the Russians play on time to give Bashar al-Assad time and to prevent a real soft landing for the Syrian crisis, the longer things will get worse toward a civil war. What I do mean by a soft landing is the fact that the international community should request from Bashar al-Assad to leave power, to prepare for a certain transitional period led by whoever would be guaranteeing the safety and that the minorities will have their role. They feel completely safe under the transitional period. It is very much a very important notion now in our perception about the future. But meanwhile, postponing the solution for an unlimited period will not save even the face of the Russians.
You're a former advisor to President Bashar al-Assad. Do you think it's a possibility that he'll step down? Will he even consider it?
I don't think that he himself is in a psychological situation to leave the regime, to leave the power. But what I would think that there are an immensely wide community of Alawite and other factions of our society that are quite aware of the dangers in which Bashar al-Assad pushing the country to. And for that, I think soon there are beginning cracks within the inner circles of the regime, the third and the fourth north circles. Already many people who were surrounding Hafez al-Assad, the father, were declaring they are just considering Bashar al-Assad as getting mad and no more really able to manipulate the situation. So we have to gamble on those people to just help in this. And the more the international pressure will increase. I'm not speaking about violence, I'm not speaking about no-fly zone anyhow, but we are speaking about international pressure for Bashar al-Assad to step down. The more other people within the other minorities will be able really to make a real step toward opening a national dialogue and really heading toward a transition. About the no-fly zone, I would like to have a comment that we Syrians do not like anybody to die for us. We will die for our country, but meanwhile we can say that now we have safe havens that are in some areas, as I explained at the beginning of this program, and those safe havens could be soon bombarded by aviation, just like Saddam Hussein had done against our brothers, the Kurds in northern Iraq. And then the international community was forced to implement a no-fly zone. We are not requesting anybody to protect us. We will be able to free our country.
Okay, so no-fly zone off the table as far as this discussion is concerned. David Mack, what other international pressure can be applied?
Well, I think the most important thing is an embargo on arms shipments. I don't disagree, in fact, with the Russian view that that embargo should be effective against the Syrian opposition as well as the Syrian armed forces. I think there's some logic to that. But the reality is that right now it's Russia that's the principal supplier of arms into Syria, and this is destabilizing. It encourages Bashar to stay obstinately. I agree with what Samir Taqi had to say. There are powerful forces within the Syrian regime itself that don't view Bashar al-Assad and loyalty to him as the most important objective. In fact, I should think that the Russian government would want to have a good relationship with whatever Syrian government is in control 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now. And I think it's very unlikely that Bashar al-Assad is going to be the leader of that government.
Dmitry Babich, your response to that?
Well, what I can say is that any kind of violent change of government is bad. And in Syria, traditionally, it's a very interesting situation. In Israel and Palestine, the Muslim fundamentalists are anti-American because Israel was a client of the United States. In Syria, the Muslim fundamentalists are anti-Russian, and they were anti-Soviet because Syria was a client of the Soviet Union. This is our history, and we have to remember it. But changing violently the government and installing no one knows whom in power is not a solution. Certainly it's not a solution. And until we see some real negotiation there, I don't see a peaceful way out. The only way out is negotiation, because we know from our own experience, and we know from the experience in Libya, that the international community is usually unable to protect the losers. In Kosovo, the Serb minority is basically wiped out. In Libya, the victors are taking terrible revenge on the losers. I don't see why this situation would not repeat itself in Syria.
Okay, Samir Al-Taqi, I'll just give the last word to you. With such differences existing between members of the international community, what hope within Syria that there can be a solution found outside the country?
The current situation in Syria is really collapsing. Practically now the economic situation, not only at the level of the government control of the economic situation, but also at the level of the grassroots, the majority, the quasi-majority of the business people are really leaving the country, closing their factories and smuggling their money out of the country. Even those who are from the same community of the president himself, the closest people to himself, he knows that that they are leaving the country and smuggling the money out. At the level of the grassroots, you know, practically it is a standstill all over, even at the level of the agriculture, even at the level of course, tourism is now zero. We are estimating that there is a minus development in the Syrian economy for this year, which would be in our center appreciated at about 35% this year. We can go through that in another program maybe. So the collapse of the state is imminent.
Okay.
And this is going at the level of the grassroots.
Okay, we do have to leave it there. Certainly days of tough talk at the UN Security Council ahead, and we'll be monitoring that closely. For now, though, thanks very much to all our guests for joining us here on Inside Syria. We've got Samuel Taki in Dubai, in Washington, Ambassador David Mack, and in Moscow, Dmitry Babich. And thank you very much for watching. If you want to catch the show again online, just go to our website, aljazeera.com. And do try to join us again next week for more Inside Syria. Bye for now.